Are you ready for Election Day? August 4th is your chance to make your voices heard. I'm Lisa Oligas, and this is Newsmakers. Today we learn about two amendments on the ballot for Missouri voters. We will talk ballot language for Amendments 4 and 5 with Jasper County Clerk Charlie Davis, and then we will talk with people on both sides of the issues, pro and con. Joining us first is Jasper County Clerk Charlie Davis with a look at what voters will see on the ballot. Welcome back to Newsmakers, Charlie.
Thank you for allowing me to join you.
Yeah, it's so exciting. We are talking amendments to the state constitution today. Help us understand how that is different than a law being passed by the legislature, just so we understand the difference.
Absolutely.
So what is the difference between like an amendment to the Constitution and just passing a law?
So the difference, of course, is there's two ways that you get something on the ballot. And that is through an initiative petition that are basically signatures that citizens go across the state to get, and then you have the legislature puts things on the ballot. All four of these issues, these amendments that are on the ballot, were done through the legislative process. So our legislators are the ones that put all four of these, especially the two we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and there are four on that. So what
Correct.
do you want to, briefly, what do 1 and 2 address?
Well, number one is the 1/10 of 1 cent sales tax that goes to fund state parks and soil and water conservation. It's been in place since 1984. It's just by law, it has to be renewed every 10 years.
Okay.
And it's passed every time it's been put before the vote of the people. And then Amendment 2 requires the assessor in Jackson County to be elected. Jackson County is the only county in the state of Missouri where the assessor is appointed by the county executive. And this ballot measure actually says that all assessors in the state of Missouri need to be elected.
But everybody in the state gets to vote on this.
Because it's in the Constitution, everybody has to vote on it.
Okay, so the other two are a little more controversial. Let's start with Amendment 4. Now the ballot says, shall the Missouri Constitution be amended to modify current requirements that a statewide majority of voters may approve initiative petitions to amend the Constitution and require a majority of voters in each congressional district to approve initiative petitions to amend the Constitution, and make available to each voter the full text of initiative petitions with their ballot. So please explain the change that this creates.
It's really simple. There are basically 4 points, or 3 points that we're going to talk about. Number one, it requires voter approval of the initiative petition process that are done through the initiative petition through the signature process. And would require that it would have to pass in all 8 congressional districts in the state of Missouri rather than just a simple majority. Because right now, all it takes is 50% plus one person, and the Constitution is changed. What this will do, this says in every congressional district, 1 through 8, it would have to simply pass by a majority.
Okay, and then what does it mean? I mean, does it create a difficulty making sure that everybody can read that initiative petition before voting on it?
Well, I don't know. I think information is crucial. I think every one of us need to understand exactly what we're signing. And I would be the first to admit that when I'm coming out of Walmart and there's some individuals out there with signatures, and they will say, this does this, but if you actually read what it does, this does a whole lot more. So I think information is king, and I think the people should actually understand what they're signing. And I think one of the things that is going to be required of this, that they have to have the language for the entire initiative petition on there, so that way people understand.
Perfect. It does say, the ballot also says that it would be a cost for the Department of Corrections. Why would that happen?
I don't know.
No. Okay.
It's one of those strange things that the Department of Corrections might think that it could cause some changes in it. I don't understand all the times that they put in
maybe their
the
petitions.
fiscal notes.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about Amendment 5. And on the ballot it reads, shall the Missouri Constitution be amended to require legislative phase out of the individual state income tax based on revenue growth, and authorize the expansion of sales and use taxes, and curtail constitutional limits on taxing goods and services, and require local tax rate cuts without reducing school funding if local sales tax revenue increases. All right, Charlie, dissect this for us. The first part, phasing out state income tax. There's a lot.
That's a word salad, isn't it?
It is.
A lot of information.
Is there a timeline attached to that? Phasing out the income tax?
There is. It's going to be, I believe it's going to be about a 10-year phase-in, but they're not going to do it if revenue does not increase. Then, of course, they're not going to do it. That's kind of the way that it is right now. When I was in the legislature, we passed a constitutional measure that said that we're going to reduce income tax a little bit as revenue goes up. This is actually going to speed it up where it won't take nearly as long, but it is going to be not revenue neutral. They are going to be raising taxes in another area to offset the reduction in the income tax.
Now, in the text, it says there are some unknowns with this amendment. It says, you know, they aren't sure what the impact on state or local tax revenues would be. Does that make it hard for voters?
Well, I think uncertainty always makes things a little bit more difficult to vote yes or no on. That's why I'm glad that you're doing this, and it's important for people to be informed. And the uncertainty is what people are really concerned about, because this is going to leave it up to future legislators to make the tax increase changes in sales tax and use tax. And we really don't know what they're going to do. So the uncertainty sometimes will make people a little bit skittish or nervous about doing something.
So requiring local tax rate cuts, what does that mean for cities like Joplin, Webb City, Carthage?
So the thought is if they decide that they're going to put an increase in sales tax and start taxing services. You're getting a haircut, you're getting your computer fixed, you're getting your car repaired. If those things are now going to be taxed in the future, then county revenue will increase, because there's going to be more things taxed. So what we will have to do in the county is we will have to reduce our levy to reduce property tax and reduce our sales tax, because the legislature, even though they want to increase revenue for the state, they do not want revenue to be increased on the county level. They just want us to be kind of a revenue neutral portion of that. So property tax and sales tax would decrease for the county while it would increase for the state.
All right, we're going to hear the pros and cons on this. For these amendments on the ballot, August 4th, what is the majority needed for these amendments to pass?
Just 50% plus one. Anything that is a constitutional change or any other change is just 50 plus 1%.
Okay, thank you, Charlie Davis, for all this information. We hope a lot of voters turn out in big numbers on August 4th.
Well, thank you. I just want to remind everybody, no excuse absentee voting is going on right now. You can come by the courthouse in Carthage, the courts building in Joplin, and cast your vote absentee in person. That way, on election day, if something comes up, your vote will count.
All right, thank you, Charlie Davis.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Now that we know what the ballot says, we will hear from those making a case for the amendments and against them. As we go to break, a look at the states already without an income tax and those with the issue on the ballot. Welcome back to Newsmakers, where we are learning about Amendments 4 and 5 on the Missouri ballot August 4th. We will hear opinions on both sides of the issues. Joining us first is a representative of those opposed to both amendments. Scott Charton joins us on behalf of Missouri Realtors campaign committees. Scott, thanks for traveling to visit with us and explain these issues.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm very glad to be here.
So let's begin with Amendment 4 and the changes of the majority requirements for initiative petitions and the organizations that you're representing as you talk about this.
Well, in this context on Amendment 4, I work with Missourians for Fair Governance. That's a campaign committee of Missouri Realtors. You may ask, why do Missouri Realtors care about the citizen initiative process? Missouri Realtors in 2010 and in 2016 helped put together coalitions for citizen amendments that get them on the ballot and get them to be approved by the people. Realtors' top priorities are housing affordability for all, but also advocacy for that housing affordability. And it's important that the citizen initiative process is in that toolkit for the realtors. Now, in 2010, they proposed a constitutional amendment that we saw this happening in other states, putting a tax on the buying and selling of a house or a home. And we thought that was not right. So many families struggle anyway. So we proposed, built a coalition, got on the ballot, and passed by 83.7% of the vote this amendment that says you can't tax buying and selling a home. And in 2016, the realtors saw a similar problem with a rise in the taxing of services we use every day, like might be haircuts, car repairs, doctor bills. And so we proposed and put together a coalition of citizens and got on the ballot the amendment, Taxpayer Protection Amendment, no sales taxes on services. That won with 57% of the vote. So the realtors have used this process. We consider it important, a power of the people.
Okay. Those for this say it means future amendments will reflect more broad support, but you disagree when it comes to having all congressional districts have to have that majority. Why?
Well, you think about it. Right now, it's majority rule, just like we learned in school. It's one person, one vote. If you do it in Amendment 4, they would have the congressional districts, all 8 congressional districts would have to approve an amendment. Well, what that means is one district could veto it for everybody else. An amendment is permanent, Lisa. You put that in there, you're permanently giving St. Louis, for example, a veto. Now, there might be the assumption that St. Louis and Joplin's interests don't always match, but this makes it solid. It puts it in granite. And St. Louis could veto anything outstate Missouri or rural Missouri wanted, conservative Missouri wanted. That's why we're against Amendment 4. We think it's unfair, and it devalues your vote. You think about it. Your vote's your power. You have the same standing when you go in and vote on Election Day as a CEO or a billionaire or a celebrity influencer, be it Travis or Taylor. You've got the same power as they do when you stand there as a voter. But Amendment 4 puts the value of your vote based on your zip code or your street address. That's just wrong.
So those pro Amendment 4 do say it prevents outside interest in multi-million-dollar campaigns. You disagree with that idea? I mean, is that happening, or does it happen no matter what?
Well, it's happening now with Amendment 5, which is a separate subject.
Yeah.
And many of the same people who say, oh, that's terrible with Amendment 4, the dark money's flowing on Amendment 5. So it's a bit hypocritical.
Yeah.
The important thing is the people have the power to vote under Amendment 4. We've got to keep it that way. We shouldn't dilute their vote. The worst thing about Amendment 4, in my view, is the hypocrisy of it. The legislature puts this much tougher standard on the people that you've got to go out statewide, and you've got to gather petition signatures statewide to put something on the ballot, and then you have to pass it in 8 out of 8 districts, which makes it almost impossible to use this citizens process we've had for 118 years. But Lisa, the legislature gets to just put amendments out by a simple majority of each chamber, and when they get on the ballot, they can become part of the Constitution by a simple majority. That is unfair, it's wrong, and that's why we're urging a no vote on 4.
All right, let's move on to Amendment 5, eliminating income tax over time by allowing expansion of sales and use taxes. Some states with no income taxes are flourishing, others have high property taxes. Why are you opposed?
Well, Amendment 5 is a bait and switch. You know, the legislature, they don't have to have a constitutional amendment to eliminate the income tax. They could do it by statute. They've already done it. We went from a 6% to a 4.7% income tax. They did that by statute. They could take it to 0. Why do they need a constitutional amendment? If you take the income tax to 0, it's going to blow an $8.5 billion hole in the state budget. That's the general revenue fund, and the income tax provides about 2/3 of that, about 64%. Well, you've got to fill that hole some way. This is the basic stuff of government. Healthcare, corrections, our prisons are run through general fund. So you've got to replace that money. Well, the biggest pots available, the only real pots with enough money, is the sales and use tax. So the legislature needs an amendment because they want to be able to have a license to ignore current voter-approved constitutional taxpayer protections. An example, you'll remember, I know you've covered the news here a long time, Mel Hancock was our
Hancock
congressman
Amendment.
for many years in the Ozarks. Mel, back in 1980, even before he went to Congress, Mel Hancock proposed the Hancock Amendment. The people passed it. And it says you get a vote on big tax increases. We know after 50 years, we're kind of used to that in Missouri. In 2010, I've already mentioned the Missouri Realtors spearheaded this and got 83.7% of the vote of the people for no tax on buying or selling a home. And in 2016, the people approved by 57% no sales tax on services. Amendment 5 lets the legislature just ignore that. You know, it gives them an open checkbook, Lisa. They could pass the biggest increase in taxes in Missouri history because they'd raise the sales tax rate on everyday goods, gas, clothes, food, and everyday services. Again, haircuts, car repairs, doctor visits, childcare, therapy, kids' summer camp, and veterinary care. If you're a fool about your animals like I am, pet grooming, veterinary care. All these services are not now taxed because of what's in the Constitution, but the legislature would have an open checkbook. There's the nonpartisan Missouri Budget Project that says the sales tax rate would have to triple. Now, here's why that's bad for Joplin and surrounding areas. You are right on the state border. Most of our population in Missouri is an easy drive from a state border.
Sure.
You compete with Arkansas, you compete with Oklahoma, you compete with Kansas. Retail business is going to suffer if we have the everything tax, and that's what I call it, all these taxes. And that's why we're urging a no vote on Amendment 5.
The ballot also wording says it would require local tax rate cuts, but without an impact to school funding. Is that possible? Do you take issue with that part of that?
I don't think it's possible. First of all, this notion that they're going to provide property tax relief, that's way overblown. So many things have to happen before the local governments can decide among themselves, do we want to lower our sales tax, do we want to lower property tax, which supports schools? It's a pig in a poke. You don't get property tax relief, but you're going to definitely be paying that everything tax. And by the way, Lisa, that everything tax, that has to be raised before there's even a penny of income tax relief. So you're going to get double taxed. I call it a reverse Robin Hood. You think about it, you're taking from the poor, the wealthy you're gaining from that. So we've talked about Amendment 4 and Amendment 5. Here's how I see it. It's a power grab in both cases from the people. Amendment 5 is the heist. Amendment 4 is the getaway car. Because if you do the changes in Amendment 4, the people would have their hands tied. They no longer would have the clout to fix things when the legislature wasn't listening or didn't pay attention. We've had that power 118 years. Now, let's think about this. Amendment 4, it is 1 vote, cancel 7 votes. That's not right. Amendment 5, it's estimated that the average family is going to pay $500 more a year or more in taxes. 80% of Missourians are going to have a higher tax bill. Now, those are numbers we can put on it.
Right.
But your vote's priceless. That's the important thing. It's the power of your vote. And we say vote no.
Thank you for sharing your side of the issue here.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Lisa.
it, Scott Charton. All right, we've heard from those rallying against the amendments. When we come back, we will hear from a supporter. Welcome back to Newsmakers, where we are getting both sides of the debate over Amendments 4 and 5 that voters will decide on August 4th in Missouri. Recently, a town hall was held on Amendment 5 in Joplin, featuring the bill's sponsors, Representative Bishop Davidson and Senator Curtis Trent. That event was coordinated by State Representative Lane Roberts, who joins us now to discuss support for Amendments 4 and 5. Representative Roberts, thanks for being here
It's
and
always a pleasure.
talking
Thank
with
you.
us. So why do you support the amendment that would change the approach to passage for initiative petitions?
Well, I've long supported it. You have to ask yourself, why does so much money that doesn't originate in Missouri influence our elections? It's my belief, and I think many other people in the legislature, that our initiative petition process has frankly been hijacked and weaponized against us. The statements that citizens can no longer hold their government accountable is just not true. First of all, it has no impact on statutory changes. We're talking about constitutional changes. And I think most people would understand that being able to change your Constitution by 50% plus 1 is problematic. But philosophically, I'd like to tell you why that really is so offensive to me. The process of government and electing people like myself to be representative means I represent your interests. And just because a bill has a catchy title doesn't mean it's necessarily in the best interest of my constituents. My job is to go up and look at that legislature and vet it before we send it to the governor's desk. And it's a long, long process. It has to be referred to the speaker, who refers it to a committee, who has a public hearing and has an executive session. It goes to rules, it goes to fiscal, it has to be debated on the floor, and then it goes to the Senate. The idea is that by the time it gets to the governor, if it does, it has been thoroughly reviewed and we all understand it. When you do an initiative petition, it circumvents that entire process. And so what voters get is 50 words to make a decision about changing their constitution. Some voters actually take the time to read those things, but some of them are 20, 30, 40 pages long. And so how many people actually get that opportunity? And if they did, how many of them understand the legalese involved? And so with 50 words, you make a decision about changing the Constitution. That bar is far too low to do that. And what happens when you make a constitutional change is it puts it beyond the legislature. So if you find out in the long run there's some bad, adverse effects of this legislation, the legislature can't fix it. The only way it can be changed is to come back through another ballot measure. That process has allowed people outside our state to influence the way our state operates and put it beyond the control of the very people elected to represent our citizens.
Okay. So how do you think this impacts the balance of power between rural and urban communities? Because that's kind of one of the arguments by having it have to pass in all 8 congressional districts.
Well, it clearly is part of the problem because the urban areas are predominantly a more liberal way of thinking and the urban areas are more conservative. That needs to be a balance. When things get decided by 7 counties, as happened with our current Life to Right bills, the question of whether or not the people who are being affected outside those 7 areas, where's their voice? Where is their voice? And particularly when it's that money that's being used outside the state predominantly is supporting those, what I'm going to refer to as liberal interests. Not that they're all bad. It's just that those people who live in Diamond, do we have the same interest in Diamond that they have in St. Louis? I would argue not. So where is their voice?
Our area often considered rural with less population, so those against the amendment say the change would make it harder for citizens to pass laws at the ballot box because of a small percentage of voters in one congressional district could veto the will of the people. So because if one district doesn't pass it, it vetoes the will of all the people. How do you argue against that notion?
I think that's an exaggeration of what's actually going on. The reality is that it has to apply to everybody in the state. That's why the difference between statutory and constitutional is so important. There is nothing in this that would prohibit a statutory change via the initiative petition process. We're talking exclusively about constitutional changes. That requires that I think everybody in the state is affected by how our Constitution functions. And if you allow a group, a majority group in an urban environment to decide how those people who live in Diamond and Avila and Lamar and Jasper are going to live their lives, is that a Constitution that represents the entire state? And I would argue no. And this argument that this handful is somehow going to change everything is an exaggeration. And I would argue again, if you've been watching television recently, there has been a constantly running ad opposing Amendment 4. Who's paying for that? It's the very people who are not going to be allowed to weaponize our initiative petition process against us. That's where that money is coming from, and that's the issue. That should not be happening. People outside our state should not be changing our Constitution.
All right, let's move on to Amendment 5, so you have plenty of time to talk about that, for which you hosted the town hall in Joplin. What message do you want people to hear about this effort to eliminate income tax?
Okay, Amendment 5 is complicated, but it's been more complicated based on some of the discussions. So here's the reality. The sales tax that everybody's concerned about cannot be raised without directly affecting the reduction in or elimination of income tax and property tax. Those two are tied together. You must have economic growth first, then is the reduction in the tax. But under current Missouri law, 67.505 RSMO, in 107 of our 114 counties, when there is an increased revenue from sales tax, it triggers an automatic reduction in property tax. That's the law today. Amendment 5 makes it a constitutional mandate. That's important. When I hear this always hear about how we're going to adversely affect seniors. I'm a senior. I'm concerned about it, and probably more than half of the legislature would be affected by it. It's not as though we don't care about seniors. We reduced or eliminated Social Security tax, income tax. We reduced and eliminated tax on some of the retirement taxes. We do care about seniors. Senior citizens disproportionately are homeowners. Reductions in property tax affect them very directly. So when they argue that the sales tax is somehow going to put this burden on citizens, I would argue that there is a commensurate reduction in the property tax. Another piece that we don't seem to talk about very much, I come from Oregon and Washington. Oregon has no sales tax. They're all income tax. Washington has sales tax, but no income tax. Both states are tourist meccas. But when they go to Oregon, they pay for nothing. All the services they use are paid for by Oregon citizens. When they go to Washington, they pay their fair share. Well, what people don't seem to realize is while in Missouri, agriculture is clearly our #1 industry, arguably our second industry is tourism. Roughly 40 million people come to Missouri every year. Those people, if they pay sales tax on an expanded tax base, are going to dilute the effect it has on the citizens of Missouri. And there are things that are not being taxed, like digital advertising, some of the data centers. Our tax structure has not been changed since 1939. The income tax was implemented in 1917. In the meantime, nothing has changed. And arguing that the circumstances today are the same as they were then, those tax structures never anticipated the digital world. And that creates loopholes that people can use to circumvent the responsibility to help fund their own state.
Okay. So money to fund government has to come from somewhere. So you're saying there is a balance. It isn't that we're going to because they say, where is all that money going to come from if you take away the income tax?
Right. And it's important to recognize that this is based on that whole idea of balance. The reduction cannot occur until the economy grows. The two are tied together. There's also a specific protection for school districts. The idea that the legislature is foolish enough to carve $9 billion out of our budget and backfill it with a jacked up sales tax is just nutty.
Thank you, Representative Lane Roberts, for explaining your side of the issue.
I appreciate the opportunity.
That wraps up this edition of Newsmakers. We hope you take all this information and go to the polls to cast your opinion August 4th. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'm Lisa Oligas. Thanks to all our guests for sharing their perspectives, and thank you for watching Newsmakers. Good night.